really understanding your brand as a character in a collaborative performance, right? Like, how does your character react? If you know who you are, you know how to behave.
Welcome to Made for TikTok Talking Creative, a show featuring inspirational conversations with creative leaders who have mastered the art of producing TikTok content and continue to raise the bar for the advertising industry. I'm Jordan, Creative Agency Partnerships Lead at TikTok, and today is all about making a cultural impact. Taco Bell's Anti-Hero campaign won the inaugural Best Use of TikTok Award at the 2023 Ad Age A-List Awards, and the agency behind this work is Deutsch LA. We're here today with Matt Ian, Deutsch LA's Chief Creative Officer, to tell us about how it all came together. Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's good to be here, man. Thank you for having me. Yeah, mastered, huh?
There we go. Is that mastered TikTok? I mean, how does that feel?
I don't know about that.
You don't know, but I mean, it's a learning process.
It is a learning
The learning
process.
never stops.
Yes, indeed. I'm not sure we can ever quite master it, but
it changes a lot.
Yes,
so you
does.
have to constantly master it.
Think you mastered it. Yeah.
Exactly. Until three weeks pass by,
Exactly.
and then it's just like, oh wait.
Yeah.
Speaking of learning in school, I looked a little bit at your background, and you studied advertising.
I did.
And
I did.
Did you always know that you wanted to get into this business? Like, when did that interest start?
I discovered it in art school. It was more conceptual, I think, than like a lot of the other majors that I could have done. And I think at the time I was at Pratt. I was doing graphic design, and I discovered taking a few advertising classes and been like, oh, I really like this. I ended up transferring out to a school in Pasadena Art Center. Mm-hmm. That was a little bit more they had a bit more robust of an ad program at that time. And so that was, I actually ended up studying this. And I think, it was cool. Like, you'd see like Little Caesars ads back then, this is like, we're going back to the 90s, but like funny stuff. And I'm like, hey, that seems like a really fun way to, earn a living.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I mean, I felt the same way. I loved commercials. I was truly a TV kid. So I spent a lot of time watching TV, learning jingles. Mm-hmm. Pizza obviously is like very top of mind for me too. You've seen this business, this industry transform, quite a bit. How do you continue to stay creatively inspired?
I mean, really, honestly, like, it's not that different than the way I did, when I got into the business. Look at what everybody else is out there doing. So you have to be inspired by, the literature you read, the films you see, all that. I just think that now it's just the aperture's widened a bit in terms of like, what else is out there, the different forms of media that you can consume. TikTok being like a huge one of those. Now that's part of the sort of, the catalog of things that I look at. So
your own personal process of getting inspired, are you incorporating that into how you motivate your creative teams at Deutsch LA?
I'm inspired by them in terms of like what they're sort of looking at and what they're following, and and who's inspiring them. I'm like, oh, really? Tell me about this person.
Yeah.
Like, I come from like advertising when it was very much a film medium, like, and I come from that, like how to write a script, how to do it. So I'm better at that sort of thing. I've heard it described as like a T-shaped creative before, right? Like where
what's that?
You kind of, you have broad knowledge about a bunch of different things, but you kind of go deep on one thing, right? And like for me, coming up, that was really like broadcast, I can help there when it comes to like actual craft and stuff, but
when you're trying to understand TikTok more, we always encourage people, just download the app and spend some time on it. I'm curious to know how much time you're spending on TikTok.
Probably too much. Probably too much. It is. It's great. And you start to realize like where your interests are by, what you're finding and like what you're following and like what's being served up. And, you realize like for me, it's like a lot of cooking. Like I've been and that was absolutely pandemic related because I started like, found New York Times, NYT cooking during the pandemic, and that was like really inspirational to me. It was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try this, and then coming out of that, now it's like I want to look at what other people are, how they're doing it. Oh my God, I was cutting a red onion all wrong. Like
if you're trying to prepare like a dish or something like that, are you just going to TikTok and you're typing in like?
It's weird. Sometimes like I'll save something, right? And then I'll be like, come back to that and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to look at how they actually did that, whereas, and I'll actually make that. And I have done that before, but a lot of times it's like just technique stuff, right? Like, oh, I didn't know you could do it like that. And then I'll go back and apply it to something else and like, oh shit, that worked,
Yeah.
So it's a little of both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, pivoting a little bit over into the work that you all are doing at TikTok. One of the things that I love about the Taco Bell brand is that it was one of the earlier brands on the platform. And I'm curious to know, what was the decision to have a presence on the platform when so many brands weren't there yet?
That was largely just dictated by our audience, right? Like, who's our audience? They're on TikTok. So it just felt like kind of weird not to be firstly, but it's a very, very, very collaborative platform, right? But in order to show up in the right way, you need to be collaborative as well. In order to be collaborative as a brand, you need to understand who your brand is in this equation. To make a successful collaboration, we sort of need to listen. We need to make this a dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way, understanding that about yourself and your fans, that it's not a situation where you're speaking to a passive audience that's just sitting in their chairs nicely and clapping when you do something. It's actually, there's a back and forth, there's a real engagement. Once you understand that, it allows you to be like, oh, okay, this isn't a scary place. This is a place where we could, really have some fun.
I think that's a great perspective to have, because TikTok is all about co-creation, is what we refer to it as. So when you think about features like a Stitch and Duet, it encourages consumers to have a conversation with brands, and with brands to have a conversation with consumers.
Yeah.
And so I love that you wanted to follow the audience, because this anti-hero campaign started off as a just very organic, fan-driven experience, right? Yeah. You all took Mexican pizza off of the menu, or not you all, Taco Bell.
I didn't do that.
You didn't do it. Let me clarify that. Taco Bell removed Mexican pizza off of the menu, and fans were not happy with that.
Right.
And the response was to engage in that, that discourse online and turn it into a campaign.
Yeah.
What was the decision to zero in on this specific conversation? Because people are always talking about Taco Bell.
I think you're absolutely right. Like, and no matter what Taco Bell does, like whatever they take off the menu, there's going to be, some flack around that.
Yeah.
But it was underperforming, right?
Yeah.
Item, and they decided like, okay, we've got to make some tough choices here. That came off the menu. I think people reacted. One of those people was Doja Cat, and I think that just was like throwing gasoline on that fire. Once she did it, it was like, okay, So I think there was a couple ways to sort of handle that, and I think a lot of brands would have said, look, we just have to weather this. It'll die down eventually, as things like this do. Or, you can embrace it, right? Like you can actually engage with it. And I think that's the difference. I mean, Taco Bell made that decision to say like, you know what? And it's not an easy decision to make, but they said, you know what? Like, we understand where we stand with our fans, and we're going to engage with them here. And that was the idea of bringing Doja Cat into it, working with her to speak, to a fan base. But I think one thing that I think is really different about this campaign and every other sort of celebrity endorsement campaign that we've traditionally seen in advertising, we always call it sort of a reverse engineering of a spokesperson, right?
Yeah.
We kind of hired her to speak on behalf of fans to the brand. Whereas normally what you would do is you hire a spokesperson or a celebrity or whatever, brand partner, to speak on behalf of a brand to fans. So it was like we kind of reversed the flow of that, and because of that was something I think I hadn't seen before, really, and
so what was Deutsch LA's role in that? Because that was something that really stuck out to me as well, right? Like when I'm looking at the content that Doja Cat is putting out to talk about Mexican pizza, the tone of it is so irreverent, and I was just like, I love this, because this doesn't feel like a traditional celebrity endorsement. Was Deutsch LA a part of informing what that tone would be, or how did that approach come to be?
Yes, and there were a lot of sort of sort of mapping out the beats of the story that we needed to tell, right? Like, because there was sort of engaging Doja, sort of the rapport with Doja, and then at a certain point there was going to be a re-release of the Mexican pizza, right? Like we kind of knew but within that, that framework or that premise, essentially, it was essentially a little bit of an improv act, right? Like she wasn't given a script, right? That wasn't the way it worked. It was just, here's the overall plan. And the thing about Doja is like, even if we were to give her a script, I don't think she would have followed it. Essentially, there was an understanding of like, there's going to be a certain cadence to this. Like I always think about like, I always hear that the way like Curb Your Enthusiasm supposedly is shot is like, we know we need to hit these plot points, but essentially a lot of that dialogue is improv.
Yeah.
It felt a little bit more like that than like a traditional scripted performance, right?
Yeah.
Like there was
With all the noise happening online, because it wasn't just on TikTok, why was there an intentional effort to invest in making TikTok content or TikTok be the hero of this campaign?
I think that's where it was happening, right? Like that's where the conversation was already happening. So it made sense that it, was there, right? Like, so I think, and it also was it was sort of the perfect medium for like the types of things that we wanted to do and Doja Cat wanted to do. So that's where I think it became, just like this sort of the obvious choice.
With that irreverent tone, did you experience any pushback or any barriers or challenges when you're trying to pitch these ideas and get buy-in on them?
This absolutely required like Taco Bell and us, like as a partnership at DLA, to really hold hands throughout this process. Cause we were like, we need to lock arms. We need to hold hands. We need to make sure that, we're all on the same page and we're not deviating because it might get scary. Right. Yeah. And they kind of warned us. Doja's management warned us. They're like, this is not like
expect the unexpected.
Exactly. Expect the unexpected. So I think they did a phenomenal job. I've never worked with a partner that had this sort of, the fortitude to actually, to do that with somebody like with Doja. Right. Like, and she said some pretty hilarious things about us. Like, the memes like she would send out. She did a contractually obligated jingle with us and then, posted later shit talking that jingle. Like it was, it was very clearly, honestly her. And there wasn't stuff that we necessarily knew was coming and stuff like that. A lot of it sometimes was a surprise, but it was like, we all knew who we were going into it, like who Taco Bell was. So it was like, I think everybody understood that. So they were okay with a little bit of that back and forth. It was honest, and I think that like when the brand shows up, honestly, when any brand shows up, honestly, like they're always going to do a little bit better. I think, I don't know, but especially with this audience, like who have seen it all,
Did you have any sort of strategy going into it? Like, all right, I know this is going to be something that requires a bit of risk taking and bravery. I want to make sure that Taco Bell thinks of these 3 benefits or something like what did you go in saying like this is what the benefit is?
How do you do this with the client?
How do you sell it through?
I think selling it through. I mean, I don't know if we ever had to really sell it. Honestly, with these guys, they were fantastic partners in that. They're very brave partners in that. It's not my logo on that; it's theirs. So it's like, I get that's a tough choice to make with somebody like that. This is such a relevant platform, right? So like, what's the alternative? Like not being on it? That doesn't seem like a great alternative. Right. Showing up in a way that's inauthentic to TikTok, well, that doesn't seem great either. So like, you look at like. It seems scary, but I don't know. I think it's less scary than approaching it a different way, right? Like so, and I think or not approaching it at all,
right? Or missing the opportunity altogether.
Yeah,
I think it's really helpful that there was that trust between DLA and Taco Bell.
Yeah,
we're going to take a brief pause to hear a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Did your brand or agency create the best TikTok ever? Did you rally a community around your creative idea? Did your audience take action and drive ROI for your brand? Then I need you to submit your TikTok campaign to win Ad Age's Best Use of TikTok Award. Before you get started, there are 2 guidelines. 1, your campaign will have sparked joy in one or more of our core creative pillars, which are community, sound, co-creation, and entertainment. 2, your campaign will have shown cultural or commercial impact. We're talking numbers that make the account folks and CMOs happy like. Just goes to show that a TikTok campaign is both creative and impactful. So, submit today and good luck.
So the Anti-Hero campaign won the Best Use of TikTok award at the A-List Awards. And one of the things that really stood out with the judges is that the campaign kept going. So you have this fan-driven organic moment.
Yeah.
You take Doja Cat and you produce this jingle and this TikTok content, and then you do a musical on TikTok. How did the musical idea come about?
Well, I think that came about by embracing the collaborative nature of the platform. Like Victor Kunda had a idea where he posted something about her jingle should be a musical. And we were like, oh, okay. So if this is a collaborative process, right? The jingle's out in the world and somebody comments on it. Now, what do we do? Ball's in our court. Like, how do we yes and this? And so we worked with Barlow and Bear to, create an actual musical per his suggestion. Again, like, so once this is out in the world, it's no longer sort of just ours. We're not building on our own campaign. People are building on it, and we're participating in this collaboration. So that's, I think, a great example of that. That's like one of the best examples of that I've ever seen, actually, where it's like, okay, let's take that idea and actually go make it,
I mean, it's not a subtle +1 on a campaign. It was a big idea, in my opinion. When I looked at it and it came across my For You page, I was like, this is so entertaining. I watched the entire thing. It was amazing. What was that production process like? Because you have these creators in here, you have a set, you have Dolly Parton. There's a lot going on. And, what was that process like?
I mean, there's a lot of people who could speak to this a lot better than me, who are in those trenches. But essentially, it was like a full-on real, musical production, and then sort of had that kind of third act, where we brought, basically the audience in to actually participate in the thing, which I think was a step that wasn't originally planned, but kind of given the course of the campaign and the reintroduction of the Mexican pizza, and then the Mexican pizza then sold out again because the demand was so big. It was like, okay, we need to keep one-upping this thing and keep making it, a bigger. So that sort of third act came in as a result of that. But it just was like Dolly Parton, she's a fan. We brought her in, It was a big, definitely a big production and a lot of fun, I
mean, talk to me a little bit more about how this campaign performed. Obviously, Mexican pizzas flew off the shelves. And you couldn't keep up with the demand. How else has this campaign helped the business for Taco Bell?
I think it's just positioned Taco Bell as a brand that gets it, honestly. The brand's always had a really good social presence, but this, I think, in terms of a production, I think this is where it all really came together. That it isn't just us and them; it's us. It's the whole, all of us.
Yeah, this campaign had so many extensions, and it was really. I love that. What I'm hearing you say over and over again is follow the audience. What does the audience want? How are they talking about the brand? Beyond that, what do you think was the biggest takeaway from all of this?
I don't know if it's always follow the audience, though. I think sometimes it's like you can start that conversation too. I think it's just collaborate with the audience, involve them as active participants in the creative process. But sometimes that does mean oh wow, they got a good idea, let's run with that, right? In the case of Mexican pizza, for instance, it is something that they started. Fans started that conversation. I mean, we started it by, taking it off the menu, but they didn't like that, right? So it was really that sort of that conversation that started the whole thing. It doesn't always exactly happen that well, right? You don't ever quite get, sometimes that's a gift to be served up, people getting that angry at you for taking the menu away. you know, but you have to look at it as like, some brands might look at that as like, oh my God, we're in deep shit, right? Like, because people are mad at us.
Yeah.
Like, we kind of looked at that as a gift, right? A scary gift, but a gift nonetheless. I think, you know, the takeaway that I would have is like, you know, there's always something happening, right? In the conversation, right? There's always something that you can be a relevant part of, not something that's just like, hey, they're talking about something over here and you butt into that conversation as a brand where you have no business being. But there's stuff happening, right? Like, you know, there's always, like, in terms of Taco Bell and the fans, there's always something happening. So like, keeping an ear to the ground, I think is one major takeaway from that, right? Like, but also like, you know, always starting with kind of a socially led insight. Right, like instead of like a commercially led insight, right? Like, so I think that helps as well, you know, because if you've come up with an idea that is basically like, hey, so we have a business problem, we wrote a brief to the business problem, we wrote a campaign to that brief, and now we're going to put that in TikTok and expect people to give a shit. Like, why do they, you know? And and I think that at the sort of the briefing stage, like, why should people care should be something that you talk about upstream, right? And I think that's always something you can talk about upstream.
So you mentioned earlier that you get a lot of your creative inspiration from the teams because advertising landscape is changing so much.
Absolutely.
How is that influencing your approach to talent or how you're structuring your creative teams?
For the last maybe decade, that's been a consideration, right? Like finding people who are a lot more sort of, you know, comfortable or just even native, right? Came up with these platforms. So they understand. You know, I do think that like a level of comfort with those platforms is absolutely necessary because, you know, I mean, I don't have it. I'm probably never going to have it. Like, I'm just, I came up in a different time where I created I wrote different stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I think this is really like the first time I've become just wholly reliant on other people's sort of creative abilities, like, you know, to create this kind of content. I can look at that content and curate it based on its merits and its strategic quality, whatever it is, right? Like, I can look at it for a lot of different things. I can also just from a taste level be like, is that funny? Is that impactful? Like, I can understand those things. But I think, you know, for me and probably a lot of CCOs in this business, ECDs in this business, it's really hard. Probably we're at a really hard point where up until now, everything what we were asking people to do, we had probably done a version of that at some point, right?
Right.
So, you know, I could, you know, help you with your 30-second scripts because I had done enough of those. I had made them. I could help you with your production questions because I've been on enough productions, right? I could help you with headlines. I could help you with, like, you know, a lot of stuff because I had already sort of done it myself in my career, right? So I could be like, okay, so I was able to jump in at a lot of points along that thing and be like, okay, well, what if you did it this way?
Yeah.
We're now at a point where we can't necessarily do that, right? We have to rely, because we don't have that time to put it into to learning it, maybe necessarily the same, to really mastering that craft.
Yeah.
So we have to rely on others. And when I say that, here's another thing, right? Rely not just on creatives, but really rely on the strategists, really rely on other people, you know, the production crews that are making this stuff, like, rely on others outside just creatives. So which makes a lot, and clients too, like you know, in a way that we never have. So I think, you know, a lot of the success that DLA's had with TikTok is like really embracing the whole team. Yeah. Like, in a way that there's been a lot of talk about that, like a lot of lip service to like, oh, it takes the whole, like, but this is really a situation where I see creatives working hand in hand with strategists, like blurring the process to a point I've never seen the process blurred to before, you know, and really, like, I mean, so many times this, you know, Doja in particular, like, largely came from strategists, the creative idea. So it was, you know, like, and we have some ringers on our team, but like, I think we have to embrace working a different way and working and looking for talent in different places than we normally have. Sorry, that was a long rambling answer.
No, but it was all great. I think the part that I want to zero in on a bit more is talking about fluency of TikTok and understanding the platform and how to create for the platform. You don't really get much more fluent than the actual creators that are on the platform actively creating.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about bringing creators into the agency setting and working on creative teams?
I mean, that's something that I think we should all be doing. And we're looking at that right now. Like we're actually like in the process of doing that. So we've done it on a few accounts within the agency. We work, and like it's becoming more of like, the way I look at it is like, it was always, there was sort of multiple steps baked into a production process. You know, there was like, first you wrote the thing, then you presented the thing, then you kind of got approved on the thing, then you went and made the thing. And it was like, now it's kind of like the writing and the making is sort of happening together.
Yes, it's much faster, right?
Yeah, well, it's not even, it's like not 2 steps anymore. And I think that's the main difference about, so when you're looking at like, when we're looking at talent, I'm like, who are the people who can do it in 1 step, you know, versus 2, you know, or multiple steps, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's the key difference. And this is like, I've seen a lot of changes in advertising along the way, but I've never seen something like that happen before, or it's actually changing the nature of creative casting, essentially. Yeah.
And this campaign in particular, there were a lot of risks that were taken.
Yes.
And I have to imagine that to be able to take those risks and to be able to do a campaign like this, there has to be a very strong level of trust between agency and brand.
Absolutely.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how you were able to build up that trust so that you were able to do this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, look, I mean, we have an amazing team at Taco Bell. We're lucky. We are so lucky. Like, and we can sit in a room and hash out an idea with them. I also have an amazing partner over there in Taylor Montgomery. He and I sort of fly at a level that allows us to sort of, I can, you know, call him up and say like, is this making sense to us still? Like, and we can have those very frank conversations with one another. I trust, and I trust him implicitly. Like he can interrogate a problem and ask me questions that I hadn't thought of that genuinely make the work better. He's incredibly smart like that. So look, I mean, not everybody's going to be able to have that with their client, unfortunately. Like he is pretty amazing in that respect. But I think everybody can have, you know, better transparency and more of and less of a sort of client agency relationship and more of like a collaboration between the two, more of a kind of a one team thing. And again, like I've heard lip service and I've worked with some great clients. So this is not anything on them, but I've heard a lot from people, you know, within the industry and stuff like that, like, oh, we have a collaborative relationship with our agency. And like, is that true? Is that really true? Like, are you really having, because I think it's important, especially when we get into places like this, where there isn't a finished product that you then bestow upon the world. It is a work in progress.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're not going to be a team that's working together, it's going to be very hard to usher a work in progress through the world. So we are incredibly lucky. I have an incredible, you know, partnership with Taylor, you know, and his team at Taco Bell. And I think we're just lucky in that respect, right? Like I know that there's too many conversations happening and too many things going on Taco Bell for me or Taylor or anybody to sit in each one of those conversations. And, you know, so he trusts the people he has implicitly. I trust the people, you know, that I work with implicitly. And I think everybody shares a pretty similar vision about where this brand can go and is genuinely excited. I think that's the other thing too, is like people like working on it. So it's nice to have that too. You know?
Yeah, you can see it in the work for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think when you're having fun doing it, it shows up in the work, you know? And I think like when it's a grind to get it out, you know, when it's like just a miserable grind to get it out, that shows up in the work too, I think. So like you can always tell when you see like, you know, watching football and you see that spot come up, you're like, that looked like it was really painful to make. It usually was, you know?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah, I think again, like that partnership has been great. So.
Yeah, I think you're dropping a lot of gems right now. And I feel like you already shared so much, but I want to make sure that I ask this question before you go. But is there a piece of advice that you would give to creative agencies who are trying to create a cultural impact for their brands on TikTok?
I think the two things are, one, just spend time on that platform, you know? That just goes with, and I don't know, like, especially for creatives, but like for everybody, you know, if I go back to the beginning of my career, which started in 1996. So that dates me. But like, you know, everybody said, hey, like, don't just watch commercials, watch a lot of film. Look at, like, because that's where commercials are pulling their, like commercial directors are pulling their influence from film. Expose yourself to as much that's happening in the media as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Same with writing, right? It was like, you know, I made the switch from I went from art school to becoming a writer my first year in advertising. And I didn't quite know what I was doing, but like everybody's like, just read books, just read a ton of books, right? Like immerse yourself in literature. And that way you will, you know, you will become a better writer. You become a better writer by reading, right? Like it just happens. It's the same as TikTok. Like you want to be better on that platform, watch the platform, you know?
Yeah.
Play with the platform. Like, and I think that it's funny because when I say it out loud, it seems so stupid and pedestrian to say that. Like, duh. But I don't know if we all do that. So enough. So,
honestly, I find myself sharing that piece of advice as well. You're not going to be able to come up with something that's going to perform well on the platform if you're not on the platform. But I do think there are some people who overlook that step, and so I really think it's important to mention that. Yeah, for sure. Or they subscribe rules that they've learned in previous platforms to, like, it's unique. It's got its own pace. It's got its own vibe, right? Like you kind of want to, you don't want to show up like, you know, thinking Facebook. You need to be an active member of the community before you're able to contribute to that community and co-create, as we've been talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I mean, I think understanding your brand, really understanding your brand as a character in a collaborative performance, right? Like, how does your character react to things like this? How does your character act in certain situations, right? Like, that I think is also, that's just like a good rule for writing. That's a good rule for branding in general. I think it's a really good rule for TikTok. It holds. Like, if you know who you are, you know how to behave, right? So that's, I think, again, like, I don't know, again, it seems so stupid and obvious and like pedestrian to say that out loud, but it's true. And I think like a lot of times maybe the stakeholders in an organization think they know, but they all have different ideas. You know, I think that getting that alignment before you jump into a platform like TikTok is probably a good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. My final question for you today is not present day, but of all time, do you have a favorite menu item on Taco Bell?
Oh man, that's hard. I think honestly, I'm such a traditionalist, but I really do love the Crunchwrap. Every time I go to Crunchwrap Supreme. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I go to the Taco Bell menu and I'm like, what do I want to try? And then I always get one of those too. Yeah. And I'm always like, that was the best thing I got. So a lot of times, like, I remember when Volcano came back, I really liked it. I thought it was like really good, but I still was like, but it's still about that. The Crunchwrap's the finale in the bag, you know?
See, I grew up on nacho cheese chalupas.
Oh, yeah.
That was my jam. Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Oh, you got it. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jordan. It was a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure.
All right, man.
And if you work at a creative agency and are looking for support on your next TikTok brief, scan the QR code on the screen or tap the link in our description to connect with the Creative Agency Partnerships team. And don't miss out on upcoming episodes of Made for TikTok, Talking Creative. Hit that subscribe button. I'm Jordan. Thank you for tuning in.